There is a particular kind of silence that only mothers know, not the silence of peace, or rest, or contentment, though those exist too, and a good mother learns to treasure them. I mean the other kind, the silence you learn to wear like a second skin after years of watching your children become people you didn't entirely plan for. The silence that is not emptiness, but its opposite, full to the brim with everything you have chosen, carefully and deliberately, not to say. I had been wearing that silence for a long time by the time my son Marcus called to tell me about the hotel. He didn't frame it as bad news. Marcus never did. He had a gift for delivering disappointments in the language of logistics, the way a man describes a detour not as a wrong turn, but as a slight adjustment to the route. Efficient, practical, completely bloodless. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the faint click of his keyboard in the background, which told me this was not a call he had set aside time for. "So, the Whitmore Grand has a few different room tiers, and we've gone ahead and reserved one for you. It's a standard room, faces the parking structure, but honestly, you'll just be sleeping there, right? The ceremony is in the ballroom, and the reception's on the terrace." I was standing at my kitchen window when he said this. Outside, the magnolia tree I had planted the spring Marcus turned 7 was in full bloom. Wide, creamy blossoms, indifferent to everything. I had planted that tree because Marcus, at 7, had told me magnolias were his favorite because they looked like they were trying to be clouds. I had never forgotten that. I wasn't sure he remembered saying it. "That sounds fine," I said. "Great." "Yeah. So Carla's parents are in the Whitmore suite. It's kind of the signature room, overlooks the vineyard, the whole thing. And the wedding party's on the 3rd floor, so logistics just made more sense this way." "Of course," I said. "Whatever makes the weekend easiest." He paused, just briefly, the way people pause when they expected more resistance and aren't sure what to do with the absence of it. Then the keyboard clicking resumed. "Perfect. Oh, and Mom, the rehearsal dinner is Friday evening. We've got it handled, so you don't need to bring anything. Carla's mom is coordinating everything." I thanked him. He told me he'd text me the hotel address. He didn't ask how I was doing. After I set down the phone, I stood at that kitchen window for a long time, watching the magnolia blossoms in the early June light. I thought about the fact that the Whitmore Grand was a hotel I knew rather well. Better, in fact, than Marcus did. I thought about the suite that overlooked the vineyard, and what it looked like from the inside, and the last time I had stood in it. And then I thought, not yet. I had been thinking not yet for about 14 months. Let me tell you about my son, the way you need to understand him before any of the rest of this makes sense. Marcus was not a cruel child. I want to be clear about that, because it matters, and because the easiest version of this story, the one that makes everything clean and simple, would be to tell you he was always this way. He wasn't. He was the boy who carried earthworms off the sidewalk after the rain, who once spent 3 weeks' worth of his allowance buying art supplies for a classmate whose family couldn't afford them. He was the boy who held my hand in grocery stores longer than other boys his age, not from embarrassment, but from habit, as if he simply forgot he was 11 and not 6. What Marcus became was not the result of cruelty. It was the result of comfort. And comfort, when it comes too easily and lasts too long, has its own particular corrosive effect on the soul. It does not announce itself. It simply settles in, like sediment, layering over the person underneath until the original shape is hard to find. Marcus had always had comfort. I had made sure of that, not because I believed in giving children everything, but because his father, Daniel. And I had worked hard enough and carefully enough that by the time Marcus was in high school, there was no real scarcity for him to learn from. Looking back, I see what I missed. You cannot teach someone the value of water if they have never been thirsty. He went to a good university. He built a career in commercial real estate that owed something to his own effort, and rather more to introductions Daniel had made before Daniel died. He drove a car that he referred to as modest, and that cost more than most people in our neighborhood had paid for their first homes. He moved through the world with the particular ease of a man who has never had a door close in his face and has therefore concluded that doors simply open. And then, 4 years ago, he met Carla. Carla was lovely in the way that certain people are lovely from a careful distance: polished, articulate, socially expert. She said the right things at the right moments. She laughed at the right volume. She had the smile of someone who had practiced it. I noticed, early on, that the warmth she performed in public did not quite follow her into smaller rooms, that when it was just the three of us, without an audience to play to, something behind her eyes went slightly flat, assessing. She was not, I want to be precise about this, openly unkind to me in those early months. What she was strategic. She was mapping the territory. She was learning who I was to Marcus and what I represented, and whether I was the kind of mother she could absorb into her new life or the kind she would need to manage. She decided, relatively quickly, that I was the second kind. It began with small things. The way she guided Marcus to the head of the table and placed me at the side when they hosted dinners at the apartment she had essentially moved him into. The way she referred to my late husband's photograph, which Marcus had always kept on the mantel, as a bit heavy for the aesthetic we're going for. The way she learned to speak about me in the third person even when I was standing in the room. She can ride with the others. She probably prefers an earlier bedtime. She won't mind. Marcus did not correct her. This, I understood, was its own kind of answer. By the time the engagement was announced, the shape of things was clear. I was, in Carla's architecture of the relationship, a fixture to be accommodated rather than a person to be considered. An unnecessary presence at holidays and major events, to be positioned where she would not have to look at me too directly, and thanked afterward with the mechanical warmth of a form letter. I did not argue. I did not insert myself. I watched. 14 months I had been watching. The wedding was scheduled for the third Saturday of September at the Whitmore Grand Hotel and Vineyard, a property about 40 minutes from the city, on a stretch of rolling hills that went gold in the late summer and photographed magnificently. I knew the Whitmore Grand, the way you know a place that has been part of your life so long, it has stopped feeling like somewhere you go and started feeling like somewhere you are from. Daniel and I had attended the property's opening gala 23 years ago, when it was a new venture and the owners were old friends, and the main building was still smelling of fresh plaster and new upholstery. We had stayed in the Vineyard Suite on our anniversary twice. I had been on the property for a board dinner, a charity luncheon, a memorial service for a friend, and one very quiet afternoon. Alone. The winter after Daniel died, when I had simply needed somewhere beautiful to sit and think. I had never mentioned any of this to Marcus. It had never come up. Children rarely ask their parents about the lives that existed before children arrive to define them, and Marcus, in this way, was no different from most. He did not know that I was acquainted with the hotel's general manager, a kind and meticulous man named Gerard, who had sent a handwritten note when Daniel passed, and whom I had made a point of thanking in person the following spring. He did not know that I was acquainted with rather more about the Whitmore Grand than a guest typically would be. He had looked at the property's website, chosen it for its photographs, and arranged everything through Carla's event planner without ever thinking to ask whether I had a history with the place. Why would he? In Marcus's understanding of me, I was a woman whose world was her kitchen, her garden, her book club, and occasional visits to his apartment, where I brought food and asked questions about his health and left before I became inconvenient. He did not know my world. He thought he did. This is the thing about children who stop paying attention. They mistake the last picture they took for a current photograph. They carry it around and refer to it confidently, certain they know the subject, unaware that the subject has kept living in the years since. So the weekend before the wedding, my granddaughter Lily called me. Lily is Marcus's daughter from his first marriage, a fact that Carla managed with the polished discomfort of someone handling an artifact from a period she would rather not have to acknowledge. Lily was 14, perceptive in the way that teenagers are when they have spent years in rooms where adults forget they are listening, and she loved me with a directness and simplicity that was among the most uncomplicated gifts of my life. "Grandma," she said, hike without preamble. Lily never wasted time on preamble. "Did you know they put you in a room by the parking lot?" "I did hear something about that," I said. "Carla picked the rooms. Dad just signed off on whatever she sent him." A pause. "I'm in the wedding party, so I'm on the third floor. My room has a Juliet balcony." "That sounds lovely, sweetheart." "It does," she agreed. "I looked up your room online. It's next to the ice machine." I laughed. Lily had a gift for delivering facts with the precision of a small, extremely accurate missile. "Are you okay with that?" she asked. And there was something underneath the question that was more than curiosity, a worry she was trying not to perform, because Lily was 14 and understood already that performed worry often makes things worse. "I'm perfectly fine," I said. "So, you let me worry about my room. You focus on looking beautiful for your father's wedding." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Grandma, do you actually like Carla?" "I think your father loves her very much," I said. Another pause. Lily was too clever not to understand what I had and hadn't said. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll see you Friday." After we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone warm in my hand. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to a name I had not dialed in several months, and made a call. Not to Marcus, not to Carla, to Gerard. Gerard answered on the second ring, which meant he was in his office rather than on the floor. He had a way of answering calls from his office that was different from calls on the move, more settled, more fully present. "Margaret," he said, and I could hear the genuine pleasure in it. "What a wonderful surprise." "Gerard," I said, "I'm calling about a reservation." "Of course. Are you coming to stay with us?" "As it happens," I said, "I'm already booked. Standard room, parking structure view." I kept my voice light. "My son's wedding is at your property the third Saturday of September." A brief silence. The kind that happens when a man of manners is choosing carefully between several possible responses. "The Whitmore Hale wedding," he said. "Yes, we have that. A beautiful booking. The terrace is going to be magnificent." "I'm sure it will be," I said. "I was wondering if we might have a quiet word about arrangements. Nothing dramatic. I'd simply like to make a small adjustment." I could hear him smiling through the phone. Gerard had known me for 23 years. So he understood, without my having to elaborate, what a small adjustment meant when Margaret Whitmore Hale. Because yes, you may have noticed by now that the hotel carried a name, and that the name was not entirely coincidental. Asked for one. "I think we can arrange something," he said. "Would you prefer to come in, or shall I send the details to you?" "Send them to me," I said. "And Gerard, let's keep this between us for now." "Of course," he said, as always. I thanked him, set down the phone, and went to water my magnolia. I should explain, because you deserve to understand the full picture. My late husband Daniel was a careful man. He built things slowly, and he built them well. And he believed, as a matter of personal philosophy, that the most important structures in any life were the ones that nobody saw. The foundations, the load-bearing walls, the systems running quietly underneath everything else that made the visible world possible. He applied this philosophy to business as naturally as to architecture. What people saw of Daniel was a man of modest success, comfortable, respected, a partner in a small commercial property firm. What most people didn't see, what even Marcus didn't see, because Daniel had made deliberate choices about what to tell his children and when, was the other layer. Daniel had, over 30 years of careful, unglamorous work, acquired a meaningful stake in 4 hospitality properties. Not the front-of-house glamour, The underlying ownership, silent partnership structures, dear holding companies with names that meant nothing to someone who wasn't looking for them. The kind of arrangements that don't appear on a man's LinkedIn profile and don't come up at dinner parties. One of those properties was the Whitmore Grand. When Daniel died 18 months ago, everything passed to me, as he had always intended it to, as he had always told me it would, in the quiet conversations we had over decades. Conversations Marcus had never been part of, because Daniel had been patient, and I had agreed, and we had planned to tell him when the time was right. The time, as it happened, had not yet been right, but it was coming. I arrived at the Whitmore Grand on a Friday afternoon in late September, when the hills were exactly the gold I had hoped for, and the light was doing the thing it does in wine country at that hour, turning everything slightly generous, as if the landscape itself had decided to be kind. I drove myself. I had a car the family didn't know about. Not a secret exactly, simply a detail I had not mentioned, the way you don't mention every book on your shelf to someone who has already decided they know what you read. It was a good car, comfortable and quiet and built for distance. I pulled up to the main entrance and gave my name to the valet. What happened next was, from the outside, a small thing. A brief exchange. Invisible, really, to anyone not paying close attention. But Lily was paying attention. She was standing near the entrance with two of the bridesmaids, was in the middle of a conversation that she immediately abandoned when she saw me pull up, because Lily always abandoned conversations for me, and I loved her purely for that. She watched the valet take my car. She watched the doorman, the same young man who had, 20 minutes earlier, nodded efficiently at Carla's parents and waved them toward the check-in desk, straighten almost imperceptibly when he saw me. It was not a dramatic change. It was the particular adjustment a professional makes when the calculus of a moment shifts slightly. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "welcome back. We've been expecting you." Lily, standing 12 feet away, went very still. I smiled at the doorman, thanked him, and turned to collect my granddaughter, who walked toward me with the expression of someone who has just seen the corner of a picture that is much larger than the frame suggested. "Grandma?" she said, in a voice just below the threshold of the bridesmaid's hearing. "What was that?" "What was what?" I said. She looked at me. I looked at her. "Come have tea with me before the rehearsal dinner," I said. "I'd like to get settled first." "Where's your room?" she asked. "They made a small adjustment," I said. The suite overlooked the vineyard, exactly as I remembered it. The late afternoon light came through the west-facing windows in long amber panels, falling across the sitting room floor in a way that made the space feel like something from another era, unhurried and warm, and quietly certain of itself. Lily stood in the middle of it with her mouth slightly open. She turned slowly, taking in the vaulted ceiling, the fireplace, the wide terrace where the vineyard stretched away into the hills. Then she turned back to me with the expression that I imagine detectives wear at the exact moment a case resolves. "Grandma," she said, "what is going on?" I sat down in the chair by the window, the one that had always been my favorite, the one I had sat in with Daniel on our anniversary in this very room, watching the sun go down over the vines. "Have some tea," I said. "I'll explain what I can." She sat across from me, folded her hands in her lap in a way that was so precisely how I had once taught her to sit that it stopped my breath for a moment, and she waited. Outside, somewhere on the terrace below, we could hear the early sounds of rehearsal dinner preparation. Voices, the clink of glassware, someone testing a microphone. Marcus's wedding weekend was beginning, and I, in the suite above the vineyard, in the hotel that carried a corner of my family's name, poured tea for my granddaughter, and thought, not yet, but soon. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. The rehearsal dinner was held in the Whitmore Grand's private dining room, a long, elegantly appointed space off the main corridor, nos with exposed stone walls and candles that Carla's event planner had arranged at intervals so precise they looked like they had been measured with a ruler, which, knowing the event planner, they probably had. I arrived at 7, 5 minutes before the stated time, dressed in a deep navy that Daniel had always said made me look like someone you didn't want to underestimate. I had not consciously thought of that when I got dressed, or perhaps I had. After 40 years of marriage to a thoughtful man, the line between conscious decision and absorbed instinct becomes difficult to locate. Carla's parents were already there. Richard and Diane Forsyth. Richard in a blazer that announced money in the particular way that very new money tends to do. Diane in a sequined top that was not quite wrong for the occasion, but that suggested a woman who had dressed for the occasion she wished this were, rather than the one it was. They were standing with flutes of champagne, talking to the event planner, who was nodding with the focused attention of someone who was being paid by the hour. They glanced at me when I entered. Diane offered the smile that people offer when they know they should know who someone is, but have not yet decided whether the effort of remembering is worth it. Richard looked back at the event planner. I found a seat at the side of the room and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, who, I noticed, made brief eye contact with me in the way that staff sometimes do when they have received a quiet instruction from somewhere above them. I said nothing. I sat, and I watched. Marcus came in at 7:15 with Carla at his side, and they moved through the room the way couples move when they have rehearsed being a couple almost as carefully as they have rehearsed everything else, touching at the appropriate moments, laughing at the appropriate volumes, presenting a unified front so thoroughly unified that it had begun to resemble a performance more than a life. He saw me. He crossed to me immediately, which I noted, because Marcus was not always reliable about crossing rooms for me in the presence of other people who required his attention. "Mom," he kissed my cheek. "You made it okay? Room all right?" "Perfectly comfortable," I said, which was, by any measure, entirely true. "Good. Good." His eyes were already moving back to the room, cataloging, checking. Carla's parents love the suite. "By the way, the vineyard view is just, yeah." "I imagine it's beautiful," I said. He was gone before the sentence finished. Carla came to me a moment later, with the practiced warmth she wore at events. She was beautiful in the way that required maintenance and effort, and the particular discipline of someone who had decided, early, that appearance was a form of currency, and had managed her account accordingly. "Margaret," she said, taking both my hands in the way that means nothing and is designed to mean nothing. "So glad you're here. You look lovely." "As do you," I said. "The room is gorgeous, Carla. You've done a wonderful job." Something moved behind her eyes. The faintest flicker, the assessment recalibrating. She had expected, I think, some version of a woman grateful to be included. What she was reading in my face was harder to categorize, and she was too controlled to let the uncertainty show for more than a moment. "Well," she said, "we wanted everything perfect." She squeezed my hands once, released them, and moved on. Lily appeared at my elbow approximately 30 seconds later, with the silent efficiency of someone who had been waiting for an opening. "She looked at you weird just now," Lily said, in the tone of a 14-year-old who has decided that accuracy is more important than tact. "Did she?" I said, like she was trying to figure something out. Lily tilted her head. "Grandma, about the room. Are you going to tell me?" "I told you everything I can right now," I said. "That's not the same as everything." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." She narrowed her eyes at me with an expression so precisely like Daniel's that I had to look at the candles for a moment to recover myself. "Okay," she said finally, "but you'll tell me eventually." "When the time is right," I said. "I promise." She accepted this with the grace of someone who has learned, through long acquaintance with me, that patience in my company tends to be worth the cost. The dinner itself was pleasant, in the way that events are pleasant when everything is beautifully arranged, and the food is excellent, and the conversation is managed so carefully that nothing real is allowed to surface. Toasts were made. Richard Forsyth spoke about Carla with the pride of a man who has never doubted that his daughter was the most important person in any room she entered. Marcus's best man told a story about a golf trip that was funnier in the telling than it deserved to be. I was not asked to speak. I had not expected to be. What I was asked to do at a certain point in the evening was move. When Carla's event planner came to me with an apologetic smile and explained that they needed to rearrange the seating slightly for the photographs, and would I mind shifting to the end of the table? Just temporarily, just for the pictures. I minded, in the way that you mind something that confirms what you already know about people. But I moved. I smiled at the photographer. I sat where I was placed, and I ate the excellent food, and I watched my son laugh with his future father-in-law. And I thought about Daniel, who would have known exactly what I was thinking, and would have put his hand over mine under the table without saying a word. Not yet, I thought. But the weekend is young. Saturday arrived the way September days do in wine country. Slowly, generously, with the light coming up gold, and the air carrying the particular clarity that only exists in places where the land is old and well-tended. I took my coffee on the terrace of the vineyard suite and watched the hills come into focus as the morning settled around them, and I allowed myself, for a private hour before anything was required of me, to simply be present in a place I loved. I had slept well. I sleep well generally. Daniel always said it was the sign of a clear conscience, and I had chosen to believe him because the alternative explanations were less flattering. At 9, Gerard called to confirm that everything was arranged as we discussed. "The reservation adjustment has been processed," he said, in the measured tone of a man who has spent 23 years learning which details require elaboration and which do not. "Your name is on the account, as always. Everything else is in order." "Thank you, Gerard," I said, "for everything." "It's always a pleasure," he said. "Enjoy the wedding, Margaret." At 10:30, I dressed. The dress was the color of champagne, not gold, not cream, but the precise shade between them that catches light without demanding it. I had bought it 6 weeks ago, specifically for today. Lily had been with me when I bought it, and she had stood in the dressing room doorway and said, with the economy of expression that was her greatest talent, "Grandma?" "Yes." I put on the earrings Daniel had given me for our 30th anniversary. I stood at the mirror for a long moment, looking at myself with the clear, unsentimental attention that I had learned over many years to bring to most things. Then I went downstairs. The lobby of the Whitmore Grand on a wedding Saturday had a particular texture: controlled, beautiful chaos, the organized collision of families and flowers, and nervous energy, staff moving at that precise speed that is not quite running, but that covers ground efficiently. I came down in the elevator and stepped into it with the equanimity of someone who had been in many lobbies, on many mornings, and had long since stopped being rattled by noise. I saw Carla's mother first. Diane was at the front desk with the expression of a woman who has identified an injustice and intends to see it addressed. I caught fragments as I crossed the lobby. "Our suite is extraordinary. I'm not complaining about our suite. I'm simply saying that I noticed that someone has been moved into the large terrace suite, the one above the vineyard, and we were told that was not available when we were booking, so I'm just wondering why it appears to—" The young woman at the front desk was managing this with impressive composure, which told me she had been briefed. "The Vineyard Terrace Suite is a private reservation, ma'am. I'm not able to share guest details, but I can assure you every guest at the Whitmore Grand receives our full attention and—" "I understand that. I'm simply asking who—" I had crossed the lobby by this point and was moving toward the terrace where the pre-ceremony gathering was beginning, and I did not stop to resolve Diane's question. She would get her answer eventually. That was the nature of answers. They arrived when they arrived, and not before. What I did not anticipate was Marcus. He was standing just inside the terrace doors, in his wedding suit, charcoal gray, beautifully cut, the kind of suit that Carla had certainly selected, talking to his best man and holding a glass of orange juice with the particular stiffness of a man who is managing nerves through rigid posture. He looked, at that moment, was so precisely like the boy he had been at important moments in his childhood, school plays, graduation, the day he got his driver's license, that something in my chest went very quiet. He turned when I came through the doors. I watched him see me, not the first glance, which was reflexive. His mother, present, noted. I mean the second look, the one that happens when the first look doesn't quite resolve into the expected picture, and the eye goes back to check its work. He looked at the dress, he looked at the earrings, he looked at my face, which was, I imagine, composed and pleasant, and gave him nothing. Mom, he crossed to me. Wow, you look great. Thank you, darling, I said. You look very handsome. He kissed my cheek, then, because Marcus was many things, but not entirely unobservant. I heard there was some kind of room mix-up? Carla's mom was saying something about the suite. No mix-up, I said pleasantly. Everything is exactly as it should be. He looked at me for a moment longer than he normally would have. I held his gaze with the particular serenity of someone who has been holding difficult gazes for a very long time. Okay, he said slowly. Good. Good. Then someone called his name, and he was gone, and I went to find my seat in the third row, the seat that had been assigned to me, which was 3 rows behind Carla's parents and 2 rows behind Marcus's business partners. Because the architecture of a seating arrangement always tells you everything you need to know about how someone understands the relative importance of the people in their life. I sat in the third row. I folded my hands in my lap. I watched my son get married. The ceremony was genuinely beautiful, which I say without reservation and without irony, because I am not a woman who withholds credit when credit is deserved. The terrace was everything September wine country could offer. The hills in their gold, the sky a specific shade of blue that has no good name, the wisteria along the stone balustrade releasing its last fragrance of the season. Carla walked beautifully. She had the posture of a woman who understood exactly what she looked like from every angle, and she used it well. Marcus's face when he saw her, I watched his face, was open in a way that I had not seen in a long time. Unguarded, real. It reminded me, painfully and sweetly at once, that he was still the boy who had carried earthworms off the sidewalk, still somewhere under all of it, and that whatever this marriage was going to be, he had entered it with something genuine. I thought of Daniel at our wedding, the particular quality of his attention when I came down the aisle, as if everything else in the room had gone slightly out of focus. I had kept that image for 40 years, carried it through difficult stretches and long silences, and the ordinary erosions that any long life together involves, and it had never lost its warmth. I wished Marcus that. Regardless of everything else, I wished him that. Lily was in the wedding party, third from the left among the bridesmaids, in a dusty rose that suited her rather better than Carla had probably intended. She caught my eye once during the vows, and I gave her the smallest nod, and she smiled with one side of her mouth in the way that meant she understood something she wasn't quite ready to articulate yet. When the officiant pronounced them married and Marcus kissed his wife, and the terrace filled with the particular sound of an occasion completing itself, I clapped with everyone else, and I felt, genuinely, without complication, glad that he was happy. The rest of it could wait another few hours. The reception was on the lower terrace, as Marcus had said, and it was magnificent. The event planner had, whatever her other qualities, an eye for atmosphere. So now the long tables glowed. The vineyard spread away beyond the stone balustrade in the early evening light. A quartet played something unobtrusive and elegant near the bar, and the guests moved through it all with the loosened pleasure of people who have been fed well and are about to be fed better. I was seated at table 7. I want to be precise about this, because precision matters, and because I think you deserve the full picture of what table 7 represented in the geography of that reception. The head table was on the elevated section of the terrace, overlooking everything. Carla's family occupied the 2 tables immediately below. Marcus's business associates had the next cluster. Table 7 was against the interior wall, not quite inside, but not fully outside either, as if the person who had done the seating chart had not been entirely sure whether to include me or not, and had resolved the uncertainty by placing me in the threshold between the 2 options. I shared table 7 with Marcus's elderly great-aunt Bess, who was 91 and delightful, and had brought her own individually wrapped candies in her evening bag, 2 colleagues of Carla's from her former workplace who knew no one and were making the best of it, and a cousin of Marcus's from his father's side, who I had met perhaps twice, and who spent the evening on his phone with the dedication of a man completing an urgent and invisible project. Aunt Bess leaned toward me at one point and said, "Are in the uninhibited volume of someone who has passed 90 and made her peace with it. They've put us with the people they didn't know what to do with. We're in excellent company then," I said. She laughed, a short, delighted sound, and offered me a wrapped candy, which I accepted. It was during the main course that it happened. I had excused myself briefly. The journey from table 7 to the powder room required a route that took me, necessarily, near the front desk corridor, and I was returning when I heard the voices. Not raised voices. That was the thing. They were the voices of people who believe they are entirely private, speaking at the normal volume of a conversation that is not meant to be overheard. Carla's voice first, clear and precise. "Doesn't make any sense. Ah, she's in the Vineyard Suite," Richard confirmed it with the front desk manager, "and they are refusing to say who authorized the move." And then Marcus, more uncertain. "Maybe there was an error in the original booking. I can look into it after." "It's not an error, Marcus. That suite costs $4,000 a night. Nobody accidentally ends up in a $4,000 suite." A pause. "She's my mother," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that I couldn't quite name. Not defensive, exactly. More like a man trying on an explanation and finding it doesn't quite fit. "I know she's your mother. I'm asking how she ended up in the most expensive room in the hotel when we booked her a standard." Another pause, longer. "I'll talk to the front desk," Marcus said. "Please do. Because my parents are paying for this wedding, and my mother asked specifically about that suite and was told it wasn't." I had heard enough. I walked back to table 7. I sat down. Aunt Bess offered me another candy, and I accepted it with more gratitude than the situation strictly warranted, and I looked out at the vineyard, which was doing the thing it did at dusk, going dark at the edges and holding the last light in the middle, the way old things sometimes hold on to warmth longer than you expect. Marcus appeared at table 7 approximately 12 minutes later. He crouched beside my chair in the way that adults do when they need to have a private conversation in a public room and don't want to make a scene of it. "Mom," he said low, "the front desk is saying your room was changed to the Vineyard Suite. Did you call them?" I looked at him steadily. "I made a small adjustment," I said. "Mom, that suite is—" He stopped, started again. "How did you— They said it was a private reservation, on an account." He was watching my face with the focus of a man who has just noticed that the room he thought he knew has a door in it that he never saw before. "Mom, whose account?" I held his gaze for one long, quiet moment. "I think," I said gently, "that there are some things we should talk about. After the wedding. When it's just the 2 of us." He stared at me. "Enjoy your reception, Marcus," I said. "You look wonderful. Your father would have been so proud." He stood slowly. He looked at me for another moment, with an expression I had not seen on his face in years. Uncertain, young, stripped briefly of the comfortable confidence that had settled over him like a second skin. Then someone called his name from the head table, and he went, Because that is what people do at their own weddings. They go toward the sound of their name. But he looked back once, before he reached the head table. And I was still watching. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Linda's Life Diaries. The best ones are still coming. And the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. The night after a wedding has a particular quality that the wedding itself never quite manages. The ceremony is too bright, too orchestrated, too aware of itself being witnessed. But the night after, when the guests have gone, and the flowers are wilting in their arrangements, and the staff are moving quietly through the spaces where all that feeling happened, folding napkins and collecting glasses, and restoring the world to its ordinary proportions, that is when the truth of a thing settles in. Not the version that was performed for the photographs, but the real version, the one that will still be true in 10 years, and 20, when the photographs have faded and the flowers are long gone, and what remains is simply what people did when they thought no one important was watching. I knew, when I went to bed that Saturday night in the Vineyard Suite, that the truth of this particular weekend was not yet finished settling. I slept well, as I said I tend to do. Sunday morning arrived in the way that mornings after events always do, slightly deflated, slightly relieved, with the particular quiet of a house that has been very loud and is now remembering itself. I was on the terrace with my coffee before 8, watching the mist lift off the vineyard in long, slow ribbons, thinking about nothing very specific, and everything at once, the way you think when you are somewhere beautiful, and you have permitted yourself the luxury of not being in a hurry. Lily found me at 8:15. She appeared at the terrace door in the oversized sweatshirt she had apparently been sleeping in, her hair in a loose braid that had mostly escaped itself overnight, carrying her own coffee in a cup she had evidently acquired from somewhere in the hotel. She was barefoot on the stone terrace, and she didn't seem to notice or care. She sat down across from me without asking whether she was interrupting. She was the only person in my life I would never want to tell otherwise. We sat in companionable silence for a while, looking at the vineyard. Lily wrapped both hands around her cup. She had Daniel's hands, long-fingered, deliberate. I had noticed this when she was very small, and I had been noticing it ever since, the way certain traits jump a generation and land so precisely that it takes your breath away. "They were talking last night," she said eventually, "after the reception, in the corridor by the elevator. Dad and Carla and her parents. I imagine there was a great deal of talking," I said, "about your room." She paused. "About you." Another pause. "About the hotel." I looked at my coffee. "Carla's dad was on his phone for a long time," Lily continued, with the measured tone of someone relaying information they have not yet fully decoded. "He looked, I don't know, I've never seen him look like that. He always looks like he's the most important person everywhere he goes. Last night he looked like someone who just realized he might not be." I said nothing. "Grandma." Lily set down her cup. She looked at me with those direct, clear eyes that had never once in her 14 years offered me anything less than her full attention. "I need you to tell me now. Not everything. I understand there are things you can't tell me yet. But enough. Tell me enough." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at the vineyard, which was coming clear now as the mist dissolved. Row after disciplined row of vines going gold and green in the early light. "Your grandfather," I said, "was a very careful man." "I know," she said. "He built things slowly. He believed that the most important structures were the ones nobody saw." I turned my coffee cup in my hands. "He spent 30 years building something that most people, including your father, didn't know existed. And when he died, he left it to me. As he always said he would." Lily was very still. "The Whitmore Grand," she said, not a question. "Among other things," I said. She absorbed this. I watched her absorb it, watched the pieces move in her mind, clicking into new positions, the picture reforming with the correct information. This was the thing about Lily. She didn't panic when the picture changed. She just looked at the new one with the same clear attention she had given the old one. Among other things, she repeated slowly. How many other things? That, I said, is a conversation for another time. She nodded. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the vineyard. Then, does Dad know? Not yet. When are you going to tell him? I thought about Marcus's face the night before, crouching beside my chair with that unfamiliar uncertainty in his eyes, stripped briefly of the man he had become, and looking, just for a moment, like the boy who had carried earthworms off the sidewalk and bought art supplies for a classmate who couldn't afford them. Today, I said. I had asked Gerard to arrange a private room for 11 o'clock. Not the suite, somewhere smaller, more neutral. A sitting room off the main corridor that the hotel kept for quiet meetings, with 2 sofas and a low table, and windows that overlooked the garden rather than the vineyard. A room that asked nothing of the people in it. I texted Marcus at 9. Please come and see me this morning before you leave. Sitting room B, 11 o'clock, just the 2 of us. He responded in 4 minutes, which told me he had been thinking about last night. Of course. Is everything okay? I considered this question for a moment. Everything is fine, I wrote back. See you at 11. I arrived at the sitting room at 10:50. I had asked for tea to be brought, and it was already there. A proper pot, 2 cups, lined a small plate of the shortbread that the Whitmore Grand made in-house, and that I had always thought was among the finest things about the property. I sat on one of the sofas, and I arranged my hands in my lap, and I did the thing I had learned to do in the months since Daniel died, when I had faced any number of difficult and necessary conversations. I let myself be still, not numb. Still. There is a difference, and it matters. Marcus arrived at 3 minutes past 11. He was in weekend clothes, jeans, a dark sweater, and he had the look of a man who had not slept entirely well, which I recognized because I had watched that look on him since he was small. He always carried poor sleep in the set of his jaw, a slight tightness that he was never aware of. He came in and sat on the sofa across from me, and for a moment we simply looked at each other. I poured him tea. He accepted it without speaking, which was, perhaps, the most honest thing he had done with me in months. "Mom," he said finally, "what's going on?" "I have some things to tell you," I said. "I should have told you sooner. That's on me, and I want to acknowledge it plainly. Your father and I made decisions about timing that, looking back, I'm not certain were entirely right. I would like to explain them to you, and I'd like you to listen before you respond. Can you do that?" He looked at me. Then he nodded. I told him. Not everything. There are layers to this kind of disclosure that require lawyers and accountants and properly structured conversations, and I was not going to attempt those over tea in a hotel sitting room. But the shape of it, the real shape, which was considerably different from the shape Marcus had been carrying in his understanding of me, and of his father, and of where the family stood in the world. I told him about the properties, the holding companies, the structure Daniel had built and maintained over 30 years with the patient, unglamorous dedication that was the truest expression of his character. I told him about the Whitmore Grand specifically, the original partnership, the stake that had grown over 2 decades, the way the hotel's name had come to carry a piece of our name not as a vanity, but as a natural consequence of involvement that had never needed to announce itself. I told him that when Daniel died, the estate had passed to me entirely, as Daniel had always planned, and as I had always known it would. I told him that we had intended to tell him, that there had been a plan, loose and patient, the way Daniel made all plans, and that the plan had been interrupted by Daniel's death, arriving sooner than expected. That in the months after, I had been managing grief and legal processes, and the considerable complexity of an estate that most people, including Marcus, had not known existed, that I had not hidden it from malice, that I had simply been waiting for the right moment and the right words. Marcus sat very still through all of this. He held his teacup. He did not drink from it. He looked at me with an expression that moved through several states: disbelief, recalibration, something that might have been the beginning of understanding, something that I recognized, with a quiet ache, as the look of a person hearing that the ground beneath them is considerably different from what they believed. When I finished, the room was quiet. Outside, a gardener was moving through the hotel's rose beds with a pair of shears, cutting back the late-season growth with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound reached us faintly, a small, practical sound, the sound of someone tending to something they intended to last. "Dad knew," Marcus said finally. "Obviously, Dad knew." "Of course," I said. "And you both decided not to tell me." "We decided to wait until the time was right," I said. "In retrospect, I can see that there is a version of that decision that looks like withholding. I want to be honest with you about that." He was quiet again, quiet. Then, "The suite." "Yes." "You called the front desk and moved yourself into a $4,000 suite." He said it with something that wasn't quite bitterness and wasn't quite humor, something halfway between them. "I called Gerard," I corrected gently. "He's the general manager. I've known him for 23 years. And it wasn't— I want to be clear about this, Marcus. It was not about the money. I don't need you to understand the full financial picture today to understand this part. I moved into that room because you placed me next to the ice machine, because Carla's parents were in the best suite in a hotel that carries a piece of our family's name, and I was allocated a parking structure view and the assumption that I wouldn't notice the difference." I paused. I noticed. He looked at the table. "I should have—" He stopped. Started again. "Carla handles the logistics." "I know she does," I said. "And you sign off on whatever she sends you." Silence. "Marcus!" I set down my cup. I leaned forward slightly, because this was the part that mattered, the part I had been carrying toward for 14 months. "I'm not telling you any of this to embarrass you. I'm not telling you to make a point about the room, or the seating chart, or the rehearsal dinner. I'm telling you because you are my son, because I have watched, for a long time now, and I have seen things that concern me, and I love you far too much to keep watching in silence indefinitely." He looked up. "She is your wife," I said. "I mean that with full weight. She is your wife, and I will respect that entirely. But you are also my child. And the man who signs off on seating charts without reading them, Xiao, who calls his mother to tell her about her hotel room while he is typing on a keyboard, who sits his mother in the 3rd row and the 7th table and the threshold between inside and outside. That man is not entirely who you are. I have seen who you are. I knew you before you learned to hide it under all of this." I gestured gently at nothing specific and everything general. "And I would like him back when you're ready." Marcus looked at me for a long time. And then, I had not expected this, or perhaps some part of me had, the part that had known him since before he could talk. His face did the thing it had done when he was very small, and something had broken through the particular composure that even children learn to perform. It simply fell open, not dramatically, not with tears, though his eyes went bright. There was just a sudden absence of the careful arrangement that adults wear in front of people they are trying to manage, replaced by something unmediated and real. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was different, younger. "Mom, I genuinely didn't know any of it. About Dad, about the—" He stopped. "I thought I knew what our life was. I thought I understood." "I know," I said. "That's not your fault. Some of it is mine, and some of it is your father's, and we should have done it differently. But some of it, Marcus, some of it is the distance you allowed to grow, the calls that happened while you were typing, the visits that fit into the schedule when nothing else needed the slot." I said this without heat, without accusation, simply as one fact among the others. I am not a woman whose world is her kitchen and her garden. I have never been that woman. You stopped looking closely enough to notice. He was quiet for a long time. The gardener outside moved to the next section of rosebeds. The shears made their small, steady sound. "What happens now?" Marcus asked finally. Now, I said, I would like you to take this. I set a card on the table between us, the card that my attorney had given me, with the name of the firm that handled the estate. And call these people on Monday morning. We'll arrange a proper meeting and go through everything with full transparency. You should understand what your father built. You should understand where the family stands. It will take some time, and it will require your attention, and I think you are capable of giving it. He picked up the card. He looked at it for a moment. And the hotel? Is mine, I said simply. Among other things. Which means that last night you got married at a property that belongs to your mother, and your wife's parents stayed in a suite that I could have charged them $4,000 a night to occupy. I let that sit for a moment. I didn't, because that's not who I am. But I want you to understand the shape of things. He looked at the card. He looked at me. I'm sorry, he said. About the room, about all of it. Mom, I'm sorry. I looked at my son, at the boy inside the man, at the earthworm-carrying, art-supply-buying, cloud-watching child who had gotten lost, temporarily, under layers of comfort and managed distance and a very polished woman's very clear ideas about how his life should be arranged. I know you are, I said. That's a start. What happened next did not happen all at once. That is the honest accounting of it, and I think you deserve the honest version rather than the satisfying one, because the honest version is, in the end, more satisfying. Marcus called the attorneys on Monday. The meeting took 3 sessions. The estate was not simple, and simplifying it sufficiently for a man who had never known it existed required patience from everyone in the room, most of all from Marcus, who asked good questions and took careful notes, and arrived each time having clearly read what he'd been sent, which told me something I had been waiting to know. Carla was present at the 3rd meeting, at Marcus's request. I had thought carefully about this. I had consulted with no one, which was my prerogative, and I had arrived at the position that I would not make this easy and I would not make it impossible. Carla sat in the attorney's conference room with the rigid composure of a woman who is accustomed to being the most strategically intelligent person in the room and has just realized she may have miscalculated the field. She asked 3 questions. They were good questions. I noted this without softening toward her entirely, because intelligence and goodness are different qualities, and she had demonstrated only one of them reliably. At the end of the 3rd meeting, when the attorneys had finished and the room was clearing, Carla stayed in her seat. I stayed in mine. Marcus looked between us, made a brief and probably wise decision to let the moment exist without his intervention, and went to speak to the paralegal near the door. Carla looked at me across the conference table. I didn't know, she said, and what was interesting was that the performance was gone, not replaced by warmth. I don't want to suggest a transformation that didn't occur. Replaced, rather, by something more honest. The flat, assessing quality I had seen behind her eyes on the occasions when the audience wasn't present. The quality that I had been watching for years and cataloging without comment. Only now it was directed at itself, turned inward, examining. I made assumptions. Yes, I said, about who you were. Yes? She was quiet for a moment. What I did at the wedding, the room, the seating. I want you to know it wasn't cruelty. It was... She stopped. It was indifference, which I recognize is not a meaningful improvement. I considered this. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. No, I said. It isn't, but it's a more useful starting place than pretending it was logistics. She looked at me. I would like us to try, I said carefully, to be honest with each other. I'm not asking for more than that. I'm not asking for warmth that isn't real or inclusion that isn't genuine. I'm asking for honesty because I find, at my age, it is the thing I am least willing to do without. I can do that, she said, after a pause that was long enough to mean she had considered it rather than simply agreed. Good, I said. Marcus reappeared. He looked at us with the particular anxious hope of a man who wants two important women to be fine with each other and has learned enough to know he cannot manufacture it. Okay, he said. Fine, Carla and I said. Not quite simultaneously. He chose to believe this because he needed to, and I chose to let him. The other thing that happened was smaller and larger at the same time, the way the most important things usually are. 3 weeks after the wedding, I found a property. It was not something I had been actively looking for, or rather, I had been looking in the way you look when you're not yet ready to admit to yourself that you're looking, driving slowly through certain neighborhoods on certain afternoons, and telling yourself you simply like the streets. It was a house on a corner lot, not large, with a garden that had been allowed to become slightly wild, and south-facing windows that would be full of light in the afternoons, and a room on the upper floor with a window seat that looked out over a stretch of old-growth oaks. I made an offer on a Thursday. On the Saturday, I called Marcus, not to ask permission, not to announce, to tell him in the way you tell someone who is your son and whom you love, directly, with the full information, giving him the respect of the truth rather than the management of a careful disclosure. "You're moving?" he said. "I've been in the family house for 31 years, I said. "It is time." A pause. "Where?" I told him the neighborhood. He was quiet. That's nice over there. That's really nice." Another pause. "Mom, is this because of the wedding?" "Because I meant what I said. I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "And this isn't punishment, Marcus. I need you to understand that. This is not me removing myself to make you feel the absence. This is me choosing my own space, on my own terms, because I am a woman who has earned that choice, and I am finally ready to make it." He was quiet for a moment. "Can I help you move?" he asked. The simplicity of it, the absolute simplicity of 4 words from my son that I had, I realized, been waiting much longer than 14 months to hear in a form I could trust. "Yes," I said. "I would like that very much." I want to tell you about Lily. 2 months after the wedding, she came to see me at the new house. She arrived on a Saturday morning with a plant in a terracotta pot, a small magnolia, barely more than a sapling, in full and optimistic health. "For the garden," she said. I stood in the doorway and looked at my granddaughter holding this small tree, and I thought about the magnolia in the garden of the old house that I had planted when Marcus was 7, and that was now 40 years old and full of blossoms the size of teacups. I thought about things that take a long time to grow and that are worth, entirely, the waiting. "Come in," I said. "Let's find it the right spot." We spent an hour in the garden that morning, moving slowly from corner to corner, with the sapling in its pot, holding it up against different backdrops, tilting our heads and considering. Lily took this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered to her, which was, I had long since established, the things that mattered to me. We planted it in the corner that got the best afternoon light, in soil I had already turned over twice in preparation for exactly the kind of thing I hadn't yet admitted I was preparing for. Afterward, we sat on the steps with our hands still dirty and the small magnolia in its corner, looking uncertain and brave, and full of the particular promise of something that does not yet know what it will become. "Grandma," Lily said, "are you happy?" I thought about the vineyard suite on a September morning. I thought about the sitting room and Marcus's face, and the card on the table. I thought about a conference room and Carla's flat, honest eyes, and the beginning of something that might not become warmth, but might become truth, which I had come to believe was the more durable of the two. I thought about this garden in this corner, and a magnolia that would be magnificent in 20 years. When Lily was 34, and the world was entirely different, and some things were still, beautifully, the same. I thought about Daniel, who had built things quietly and left them to me, and trusted me to know what to do with them. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." She leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her. We sat in the garden in the Saturday light, and we did not say anything else for a long time, because there was nothing else that needed saying, and because the two of us had always understood each other best in the silences that were full rather than empty. The magnolia cast its small shadow on the turned earth. Everything that needed to grow was already growing. Well, the woman they underestimated. I have been her, I think, for longer than I knew, or longer than I allowed myself to name. The woman whose world everyone in the room has already decided they understand, whose presence is managed rather than sought, whose silence is read as acceptance, whose patience is read as the absence of power rather than its most disciplined form. I have been that woman, and I have also been, simultaneously and without contradiction, the other one. The one with the other phone numbers, and the other accounts, and the stake in the hotel, and the name on the documents that nobody thought to read. The one who sat in the third row, and the seventh table, and the chair next to the ice machine, and took careful note of everything, and waited for the right moment, with the equanimity of someone who already knows how the story ends. Because here is the thing they never understand. Surely the people who look at a quiet woman and see someone who has run out of options. Silence is not the last resort of the powerless. Sometimes, silence is simply what you choose when you have decided to watch a little longer. When you are not yet ready to let them know what you know. When you are waiting, not from weakness, not from fear, but from the deep, deliberate patience of someone who understands that the right moment, when it comes, is worth every moment of waiting before it. I did not raise my voice at my son's wedding. I did not confront Carla in the corridor, or announce myself in the lobby, or correct Richard Forsythe when he spoke about the suite with the authority of a man who did not know it was not his to speak about. I poured tea. I sat in the seventh table. I talked to my granddaughter on the terrace in the morning mist. And when the time came, not dramatically, not with theater, not with anything the family could dismiss as emotion, I sat across a conference table and told the truth, simply and completely, and let everyone in the room decide what to do with it. This is the quiet power that no one teaches you and no one can take away. Not because it is hidden in an account, or a property, or a stake in a hotel, though those things are real and they matter, but because it lives in something older and more durable than money, in the knowledge of your own worth, held privately, maintained through decades of small dignities extended to yourself and others, proven not in a single confrontation, but in the long, patient accumulation of a life fully and deliberately lived. The woman they underestimated. She is, almost always, I'm the one who was paying the closest attention. She is almost always the one holding everything. And she is the one, when the time finally comes, who decides what to do with it. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated, and we tell those stories here.